to welcome you all to the public lecture series and today's lecture on public debt and regional inequality in India. Public debt is the total amount including total liabilities borrowed by the government to meet its development budget. It has to be paid from the Consolidated Fund of India. The term is also used to refer to overall liabilities of central and state governments, but the union government clearly distinguishes its debt liabilities from the states. Over the years, the union government has followed a considered strategy to reduce its dependence on foreign loans in its overall loan mix. Internal debt continues over 93% of overall public debt. Internal loans that make up the are further divided into two broad categories, that is marketable and non-marketable debt. According to M. Smith, public debts the or an expenditure. And government can borrow because it can possible that local income was not enough for the expenditure. Due to incidental expenditure, government could have to borrow because it is not possible to increase the tax income at that point. Government can borrow finance arrangements of capital expenditure because current revenue will not be enough to fulfill the target. At the time of depression, when private demand is not enough, then government borrow the extra savings of people which is not in use and spend it to increase the effective demand, and by this gives birth to the extra income and employment in the society. The fiscal position has deteriorated after the pandemic, and now we estimate fiscal deficit widened to 11.8% of GDP for the year 20 in the year 21, up from 7.8% in for the year 20. USB Securities India Chief Economist Tanvi Gupta Jain said one of the reports. She also attributed this to the pandemic related relief measures, credible and transparent accounting of subsidies. For instance, the food subsidy was shifted onto the burden from the food corporation's balance sheet and a significant revenue shortfall. However, the report expects fiscal deficit to narrow going forward but remain elevated at 10%. The center's 65.4%, stay 5% and held by a cyclical economic recovery and rollback of relief measures. The four main consequences of growing public debt are lower national saving and income, higher interest payments leading to large tax hikes and spending cuts, decreased ability to respond to problems, greater risk of a fiscal crisis. Not only this, it also has a positive side that enables the nation to work well in times of depression. Depression is the condition when the cost reduces and there is a lack of courage in people for spending money on industries, and in future there is no possibility of getting the gain. This condition can be removed when there is an increase in demand of things and services, and that is possible when in the country there is an increase in the expenditure of public construction work and most important public use in infrastructure services. Also, it facilitates to finance the war. The government can take debt for the self-defense work in present century of increased international pressure and atomic war. There is a need of money in big amount to save the country from foreign attacks and for self-defense and to do arrangements of modern decoration. But it is very difficult to collect the money for modern because it affects the production unfavorably. So, to cope up with this type of situation, government can take shelter from the public debt from inside and outside the country. According to Global Multidimensional Poverty Index 2021, India's rank is 66 out of 109 countries. The national MPI is aimed at deconstructing the global MPI and creating a globally aligned and yet customized India MPI for drawing up comprehensive reform action plans with the larger goals of improving India's position in the global MPI ranking. It has equally three weighted dimensions: health, education, and standard of living, which is given in the report by Niti Aayog. Not without taking much of your time, now I would like to introduce our guest of the day, Dr. Sudhir Thakur. Dr. Sudhir Thakur is a professor of finance, insurance, and real estate at the College of Business, California State University, Sacramento. He has been a faculty at CSUS for more than 16 years. His prior teaching experience includes Milieu College of Business and Economics, California State University, Fullerton, University of North Dakota, Grand Forks, Kent State, and the Ohio Universities, State Universities, Ohio. He received his education in business 10 plus 2 from St. Xavier's School, Delhi in 1984. BA Honours in Economics and Mathematics from Delhi University in 1987. MA in Eco from Punjab University in the year of 1996. MA in Urban Planning, University of Akron in 1998. PhD in Economic Geography, the Ohio State University in the year of 2004. His research interests are broadly in the areas of analytical economic geography and quantitative methods. His substantive research inquiry are in the areas of regional economic structure, input-output modeling, spatial statistics, and Indian economy. In addition, he is also interested in analyzing inter-industry income and public debt data for India and for developing nations from regional and analytical perspective. He has published 6 co-edited research books, 25 peer-reviewed journal articles, as well as book chapters. He teaches managerial statistics analysis at the graduation level and real estate analytics at the undergraduate level. He has been a consultant with the World Institute of Developed Economic Research, which is known as WIDER, in Helsinki and Department of Insurance, Sacramento. For his contribution to economic inquiry, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Award in the year of 2007, Emerging Scholar Award in the year of 2011 by Regional Development Planning Society Group, RDPSG. Awarded with the Research Scholar at the Inter-University Consortium of Political Summer Program in Quantitative Method at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, 2007 and 2019 respectively. He delivered the prestigious R.N. Dubey Memorial Lecture at the University of Allahabad in the year of 2008. He has guest lectured at the Delhi School of Economics, Punjab University, Central University of Bihar, University Rohtak. He has also presented his research paper at the United Nations University, Helsinki and Amsterdam, Regional Science Association, International Meetings and Association of American Geographers in North America. We again welcome you, sir, to our institute for giving us insights on this topic, public debts and regional inequality in India. And we are fortunate enough to listen to you, and I hope this is going to be a learning session for all of us. Now we invite our eminent speaker to go ahead with the session and take over the charge. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Well, good morning to all of you. Director Agarwal, all the faculty members and students who are online. I see there are almost 141 participants here. It's a pleasure, an honor that I'm sharing my thoughts with you. I grew up in Delhi, and so I have an emotional connection with Delhi as well. Uh, so the talk that I'm giving is on public debt and regional inequality in India. And I'm going to speak not as a financial analyst, but through the lens of a discipline which is called regional science or spatial science. Regional science is a multidisciplinary inquiry that utilizes theory and methodology developed in economics, geography, and planning to inquire about spatial development problems. Yes, this topic has traditionally been addressed by financial economists and financial engineering people and business finance people. But this problem it has gone further beyond these disciplines. And so people from other disciplines are also taking an interest in the analysis of debt and development. So my talk is going to be divided into the following sections. I'm going to provide a motivation and then give you a brief literature review on public debt and spatial analysis. And then I'm going to use a very simple background by Blancard, the MIT economist, and then pose my research questions and show you a lot of results. Okay, a lot of output, a lot of results, and then make some concluding remarks. So financial geography has been around for quite some time, for almost 25 years. And it became active, especially since the global financial crisis of 2008 and the pandemic more recently. In my mind, public debt, as everybody knows, is defined as the difference between government expenditure and income and tax receipts. With that general definition, we understand that global public debt has soared recently. It has escalated to an untenable level due to the recent economic recession in the 2000s, the middle of 2000s, and the global health crisis. And so debt is simply touching the roof and going through the roof in most of the nations. So the global economic recession of the mid 2000s, during that time, the debt levels soared. It increased to 53 to 80% in most of the European, most of the developed countries, as reported by the Economist in 2015. There has been a lot of work, and one work that is known as the Euro, written by Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate in economics. He studied the European Union and determined that debt crisis has reached a level of unsustainable debt levels in many of the countries in Western Europe. Well, this is a fundamental question that we have to ask. When we take debt, it's like, household debt. We take credit card debt. It's just that everything is aggregated at the national level. So the national debt can be utilized either for a productive purpose or it can be utilized for an unproductive purpose. If it is utilized for productive purposes, then we spend it on planned expenditure, on dams and roads and bridges and schools and hospitals and so on and so forth. But if it is utilized in an unproductive purpose, then that utilization can be very counterproductive, meaning that you take debt and you basically use it for servicing the debt and utilize it for unplanned expenditure. And so more recently, you might have heard, I'm sure you've heard, that countries across the world, both developed and developing, have been bailing out banks and have been providing fiscal stimulus to its citizens and to banks. And that has also contributed to the raise in the debt to gross state domestic levels. So really the big question, the overarching question that I'm posing is that, does debt promote growth or does it hinder growth? More lately, there has been a study, in fact, 10 years back, by two economists from Harvard and I think the University of Maryland, Reinhardt and Rogoff study that was published in American Economic Review and many other places. That there have been books and papers written by them. And they studied the relationship between debt and growth in developed countries. And so they took about 44 countries, did a lot of statistical analysis, and basically they observed that there is an inverse relationship between debt and growth, as shown in this diagram and shown in this figure. And so as countries grow, the debt level grows as well. It reaches some kind of an inflection point, and after that, it might decrease. And so that is known as the debt burden cliff. A lot of countries that take out debt, if the debt is 90% or above, then the chances of the economic growth as represented by the GDP might not grow. It might just percolate down, or it might just slow down. And so that is called the debt burden cliff. If too much of debt is taken out, then there's a possibility that it might harm the economy. So in that connection, there is a very important concept that has emerged. It's called the fiscal space, and I'm sure you've heard of this term as well. So a fiscal space is defined as the distance between the debt to GDP and a artificial threshold. And if the country or the state takes out debt beyond that level, then there's a possibility that some action would have to be taken. Otherwise, there's going to be a default or bankruptcy. And so the fiscal space varies between countries, between states within countries. And so Karnataka might have a different level of a fiscal space compared to Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh or Bihar. And so using this study, there have been studies in India as well, notably by Kaur and Mukherjee, 2014 and 18, where they examined the relationship between debt and growth at the state level in India. And basically they determined that there is a statistically significant non-linear relationship during the period 1980-81 to 2013-14. And so with that background, let me present the Blancard framework, which has motivated me. And so the framework is very simple. You have the equation dt, which is deficit is equal to the current debt minus the previous year debt. If you plug this equation over here, then the deficit is equal to S is the rate of interest multiplied by the previous year's debt plus the government expenditure minus the net of collection of taxes and what the government pays out. And so the current year debt is equal to this equation, where you multiply the previous year's debt with the rate of interest and the current year's debt. And so it's a simple equation. And so Blancard makes this argument that if you want to understand the evolution of debt over time and across geographical space, then it's best to take the ratio of the debt level to the gross domestic product, the GDP in a country. And so this equation 3 basically says that on the right-hand side, you have S is the rate of interest, H is the rate of growth of output, times the ratio of the debt to output, plus the primary deficit, which is GT minus XT, divided by output. And so this equation, it looks very simple, but it's very powerful as well, because it says that if the rate of interest increases, your overall debt is going to increase. If output growth decreases, then your debt increases. If this initial debt level, if this is low, if this is high, then your overall deficit is high. If this ratio is high, then that means that your deficit is going to be high as well. So it's a very interesting proposition made by Blancard. And basically his argument is that if you want to understand the evolution of debt in a country, it's best to take the ratio of the debt to GDP level in order to understand its evolution and distribution across time and space. And that is what the purpose of this paper is. And so this research is actually at the intersection of financial geography and modern spatial analysis or modern spatial econometrics. And I pose a very simple question. What are the broad trends, patterns, and inequality levels vis-a-vis public debt in India at the state level during the past 40 years, 1980-81 to 2020? And I also want to analyze the determinants of space-time public debt in India during the same period. Before we get into the meat of the analysis, the crux of the analysis, here's a figure, a chart that shows broadly the structure of public debt in India. And so debt is a very complicated situation in any country. And so we have the central government debt and the state government debt, and that's broken down by internal debt and external debt that the country takes from the IMF and other rich countries or developed countries. In particular, I am focusing on the state government debt, okay, the state outstanding loans, and I'm not looking at the other variables presented here. And so with that, let me get into a lot of visual presentation of the data that I have. And so over here, what you see is the gross domestic product, the GDP rate of growth for Indian economy since independence, after independence, 1951, 50-51 to 2019-20. And so 51-52, the GDP rate of growth was 2.33%. That increased to 5.63 in 1981-82. Then 1991-92, because of the balance of payment crisis, it dropped to 1.43. 2010-11, it again it shot up to 8.91% because of the globalization of services, and India was a participant in that and exported a lot of the information technology services that led to this high growth. And more recently, because of the pandemic, the rate of growth has declined. Perhaps it will not be very high in the near future, but I'm sure India will pick up as time progresses, as we get a handle on the pandemic situation. The next slide over here shows the fiscal deficit of states in India between 1990-91 to 2017-18. And this shows that initially the fiscal deficit levels were not that high, but since 2007 and 8, it has started to increase, and it has been growing steadfastly. The point that I want to make is that a loan has to be paid. After a loan is drawn at any level, the loan must be paid over a certain number of years. And that is often referred to as the amortization of loan, where the country or the state or the bank needs to pay the interest cost, also known as the service cost, until the debt is paid off at the maturity of the loan. So we need to understand the genesis of the debt crisis in India. India has been facing a crisis along the line of fiscal imbalance. And so this slide shows that the problem goes way back in the 1980s, the early 1980s, when the problem of fiscal imbalance was experienced by the Indian government. And so you notice that the debt ratio, the outstanding state liability to the GDP, has been increasing since the 1980s, and it really started to pick up after the crisis in the early 1990s, 1991, so to say, when India faced the balance of payment crisis because of the Gulf War in the mid 1980s, and a crisis along the front of import bills not being able to met, slump in export, worsening credit situation, and loss of investor confidence, because of which India had to draw on more and more on its debt levels. And so debt levels continued to increase till about 2009 or 2009 and 10. And then after that, it dipped a little bit, but then it has continued to increase. The blue bar shows the outstanding state liabilities in rupees crore. And so the amount that the state governments owed in 1980-81 was 26,783 rupees crore. That has increased 200 times by 2019-20. And so that is a huge leap in the level of the debt in India. And so the slide basically gives us a glimpse of the genesis of the debt problem in India. The next slide shows us the gross interest as percentage of state liability in India for a particular year, 2017-18. So this slide shows us that overall, the average percentage of state liability that was paid off as the interest cost was almost 7%, excluding New Delhi at the state level in India. Maharashtra and UP has the highest interest burden compared to other states. The northeastern states have the least. Of course, this has got to do with the largeness of the size of the state. A larger state, a larger population, obviously, the interest cost would be much more higher. Moving on to the next slide, this shows the computation that I did for the 40-year period, where I computed the ratio of average debt, the outstanding state liability to the state GDP. And so the blue bars shows the ratio yearly consolidated for the state. We're not looking at the state level, but consolidated outstanding state liability for each year from 1980-81 to 2019-90. And I was more interested in identifying the episodes, the trends. And so what you see here is the fact that during the early years, 1980-81, a continuous increase in the average debt ratio, then this was because, as I explained earlier, due to the fiscal imbalance in the BOP crisis, there was currency devaluation and current account deficit in the 1990s and a loss of investor confidence. And then there was a second phase, 1998, 1999 to 2003 and 4, where there was another spurt, another increase. And then during 2004-5, 2009-10, another round of increase. And then a fourth phase, 2010-11 to 2019-20, when the debt levels increased because of mismanagement of fiscal health, unproductive expenditure, lackluster performance of non-performing assets, and the accruing cost of higher debt servicing. And so, yes, these slides show us the trend, but I'm interested in understanding how this pans out in a geographical sense. We are not seeing what it looks like in terms of the overall pattern at the state level on a map. So I put this data on a map using GIS, and I computed the average debt ratios for each decade and then mapped it out for 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, 2020, and then computed the overall average for the 40-year time period. So look at the maps individually. 1981, it was the genesis of the problem. The problem of debt crisis had just started in India. And so the debt levels were not that high, as you saw in a previous slide. So I am dividing the overall debt levels into three categories. Low debt is defined as 0 to 44.99% in terms of percentage. Medium debt is 45 to 69.99. High debt is 70% and above. So on a map, most states look like they're doing fine because the debt levels are less than 50%, except parts up in the north in Kashmir. By 1991, you see that there's a pattern emerging. Before I talk about the pattern, I want you to know that these arrows point to the fact that 1991, there was no Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Uttarakhand or Telangana. And yet you see that these are colored in light because it has 0 values. And so map does not make a distinction that these states were not created. And so you have to understand this map with that pinch of salt. 1991, you see that the states in the north, most of the states in the north, and so Jammu and Kashmir, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Sikkim, northeastern states, Odisha, these are the states where the debt levels were above 70% of the gross state domestic product. And then you have medium debt in the western northwest industrialized states and the IT related states in the south. And so Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, these are some of the states where you have the medium level debt levels. And the Maharashtra had the least debt because it is of the lightest color. And so Maharashtra had the lowest debt level. And so you see that there is a pattern that is emerging. And then we move on to the next set of maps, 2001, 2011. 2001, the pattern is quite similar. And so you have the high debts in the northern states, but you see that the states are kind of shifting position. They are picking up, some are improving, some are not so improving. And so the least debts, the least debt states or the low debt states are now in Maharashtra, and then you have Karnataka, you have Tamil Nadu moving from the medium to low debt. By 2011, again, you see that the picture has changed a little bit. The medium debt around these northern states in the northeast, high debt in Kashmir and parts of northeast, and the states with the least debts are kind of expanding. So you've got Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. These are the states that have the least debts, less than 50%, less than 44.99%. By 2020, the situation improves even further, and so you have a lot more states in the low debt ratio, some in the medium, and the least or the highest debt is kind of concentrated up here in just one state in Jammu and Kashmir. And then the last map that I want to show you is an overall aggregate. So I compute the overall average debt for the entire time period, for the 40-year time period. And so here you see that for the past 40 years, you have a cluster of states right here in the north. So these are the highest debt ratios, more than 70% in Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Sikkim, and the northeastern state. And then you have a medium debt in the western states of Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh. And you have the lowest debts in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka. And so a pattern has emerged that kind of summarizes what is happening with respect to the changing debt levels in a geographical sense. And then in my paper, in my research, I do other computations as well. Besides computing the average debt ratio, I'm using the Gini coefficient, the standard deviation, style entropy is what I report, just to confirm and understand with respect to other measurements as well. So this one shows at the temporal, at the time series level, the Gini coefficient. So Gini is where 1 represents perfect inequality, 0 represents perfect equality. And so you see that during the 1990s, basically during the mid-1980s to mid-1990s, the debt levels using the standard deviation was increasing. And so the red bar represents the standard deviation, blue bar represents the Gini coefficient. So during some parts of the period, the debt levels using Gini coefficient was increasing, but in the past 10 years, it has gone through periods of modest increase, but overall it's flat. Then I wanted to look at the same data at the state level. And so at the state level, there are variations. There are variations that we notice. And so the high debt states are located in basically in the northeastern states of Nagaland, Sikkim, Tripura, Odisha, Jammu and Kashmir. The question that I wanted to seek answer for is whether there is interstate variation. And so both the coefficients, the Gini coefficient, standard deviation, reported a sizable interstate variation in the average debt ratio across time and across space. So the range for the Gini coefficient is between 0.07, 0.37. It's not very high, but nevertheless it's positive, and there is substantial interstate variation in the average debt ratio in India. And then I go on to compute a fairly I won't say sophisticated, but it's a little difficult. It's called entropy statistics. So entropy is a measure of the amount of uncertainty in a probabilistic distribution or the system subject to constraints. The entropy statistics has been utilized to measure temporal, time series, and cross-sectional spatial inequality. In more recent development, entropy can measure inequality utilizing data for state level and district level. I did not have district level data, but if you have district level data, then the entropy statistics can measure what portion of inequality is because of interstate inequality and what portion of the overall inequality is because of the district level inequality. So in my case, I did not have data on the district level debt levels because we don't have that. So the entropy is only capturing the time series based inequality and the interstate inequality. Okay, so the first one shows the results. It's called the Thiel entropy for the time series data between 1981, 2019, 20. And so the figure shows both the Thiel entropy, and the red line shows the GDP rate of growth. And so entropy measure, it varies between 0 to infinity. And so a relatively high entropy measure indicates that the debt ratio is unevenly distributed across time. And if it's a 0 or close to 0 entropy, that implies that the average debt ratio is distributed equally across the time points. I computed the correlation coefficient between the entropy and the GDP growth, and that was a negative, it's low and negative 0.2369 for the entire period 1981, 2020. And the range for the Thiel entropy is between 0.066 to 0.1297, not very high, but nevertheless, it shows that time series wise, temporally, there is inequality in the debt ratio distribution across various time periods. And then we go to the next figure that shows the entropy at the spatial scale, at the geographical state, across states. And so this shows that Puducherry has the highest entropy, Thiel entropy of 0.9102, and Haryana has the lowest entropy of 0.0128. And the Pearson correlation between Gini coefficient statistics that I have, as well as the spatial entropy, that is a positive 0.5614. So it shows that there is an association between the movements in the two data series between the Gini coefficient and the Thiel entropy at the state level for the period 1981-2020. And so it basically points to the fact that there is a problem at the state level in terms of the interstate inequality in the average debt distribution across states in India. And then I go on to some prediction type of analysis. So I begin with the 3-year moving average. So a moving average is pretty simple. You hold back the previous 3 years, you take the average of the previous 3 years and report it for the year in which you want to predict. So I did a simple exercise I had the data for 2019 and 20. So I use 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, and 19, and take the average. And then that predicted state liability is compared to the actual. And so it is reported here. And so it's very close. And so a correlation of 0.99 suggests that the actual and predicted are very close. And so if you look at the figure here, it shows that the actual and predicted are pretty close. In another model, I use a lag regression and use the lag state regression to predict. And so here again for the 2019, 20, 19 and 20, I compare the actual and predicted. And again, the two are very close to each other with a correlation coefficient of 0.99. The table at the bottom shows the measures of error structure for these two models. And so this is the moving average model, and this is the simple state lag regression model. These are simply the various types of error structure that we often report in analysis, such as the mean deviation, mean absolute deviation, mean percentage error, mean absolute percentage error, and the root mean squared error. An interesting result that I came across in my analysis is where I run a regression, a simple regression, a log model and a simple model. Let's look at the simple model first, where my dependent variable is the average debt ratio, and the independent variable is the GDP rate of growth. And so this has a R squared of 18.29, not very high, but it is significant in terms of the statistical significance of 0.03, which is less than 0.05. But what we want to focus on is the slope coefficient. And how do we make sense of this slope coefficient? So with a slope coefficient of 0.03, this is basically telling us that if the GDP rate of growth goes up by 1 percentage point, we would expect the debt to GDP ratio to decrease by 3%, which is very significant and powerful in terms of the analytics. This is telling us that if economic growth happens, if economic growth takes place, then it helps us in bringing down the average debt ratio. And so this is a very important relationship that can be extracted from the simple log linear model here. Moving on to the next data set, and here I'm going to increase the size. I don't think you can see it. So let me increase the size. So I use the time series data, and the time series data. Wait. Okay, so I use the time series data for 1981, 2020, and ran several models where I'm trying to understand the relationship between the explanatory variables and the dependent variable. The dependent variable is total liability at the center and state. That's my dependent variable. Total liability at the center and state level. So I have a time series data between 1981 through 2020, and my independent variables are lending rate, net FDI flows, trade balance, then GDP rate of growth, foreign exchange reserves. So I run a multiple regression model, and I won't be able to go through all of the model and the results, but let me take the first model, and perhaps I'll take one more to do the interpretation. And so the first model, you see that the R squared is 0.88, so 88% of the variation in the dependent variable total liability is because of the variations in lending rate and the net FDI flows. The lending rate has a negative sign, so this is telling us that for every 1 percentage point increase in the lending rate, the total liability at the center and state level, that decreases to the extent of this amount of rupees million, holding the net FDI flows constant. And so the second independent variable, net FDI flows, has a positive sign. So this is telling us that for every $1 million of net FDI flows, this will lead to the total liability increase to the extent of 2,397 rupees a $1 million. And so in terms of interpretation, what do we make out of it? It is telling us that as the FDI flows increases in India, well, those resources, those external financial resources, they would be utilized for productive expenditure, enhancing the productive expenditure, and the Indian economy is strong, it is resilient, and with the local digital ecosystem, it will continue to attract a lot of FDI flows, which will be utilized for enhancing the productive expenditure, putting the resources to the assets and infrastructure and other areas where the rates of return are very high, and that will help in perhaps bringing down the service cost in the long run. So this model has a R squared of 0.88, and so it's a pretty robust model. Let me take another model, the fourth model, and in particular, I want to talk about the foreign exchange as an independent variable. So it has a slope of 83.99. It is statistically significant, and basically it is telling us that for every $1 million increase in foreign exchange reserve, the economy, the Indian economy, can incur a higher debt level. It has the capacity to increase the debt level and perhaps use it for productive expenditure and invest in areas where the rates of return are very high. The R squared is quite high. The P values are significant. So the point that I want to make, and I can say that trade balance also has a negative effect in model 2, and so increase in trade balance has the effect of reducing the trade, liability at the center and state level, and so trade is growth inducive. If growth happens, then the Indian economy can pay off its debt and pay the servicing cost. So all of the models are quite robust, and so in order to check for that, check for the performance of the model, I computed the F statistics and the F ratios. All of them are significant. Basically, the null hypothesis is that the slopes are equal to 0. The alternate is not equal to 0 because the p-values are less than 0.001. It tells us that all of the explanatory variables are doing a good job in terms of explaining the variation in the independent variable. Besides that, I also computed confidence intervals, and the confidence interval did not have 0 in it. And so this implies that 95% of the time, the confidence interval that is computed is going to overlap with the true parameter value of the parameter that we are trying to ascertain, that we are trying to estimate. And thus the sample data that I'm using to do the analysis is a very good representation of the population, and the estimates are a reliable measure of the unknown population parameter. And so this is a little bit of the statistical analysis that I've done here. So this is a paper that I've written, which is currently under review with a journal. Moving on to the next slide, I did some predictions at the using the 3-year moving average, the lag regression, and the multiple regression. Yeah, you can see some pretty charts here and figures here, but it does not tell us a whole lot. But the moment you put this result, in particular, I use the state regression, the state lag regression, where I'm saying that this year's state liability is a function of the previous year state liability as well as the gross state domestic product. I'm using that model in order to do the prediction. So of the three, I use the state lag regression to do a prediction for 2021, 2022-23, and 2024-25, and put it on a map in using a GIS format. And this is the map. So for 2020-21, most of the states are in the high debt category. even the developed state. And this is largely because of the pandemic situation India is facing and the rest of the world is facing as well. But as you go on to 2022-23, the pattern is similar, but the position begins to improve slightly, marginally. But by 2024-25, there is a major shift, and most of the states are either in the medium to low debt categories, except Maharashtra, which is going to be in a high debt category. So what is it that we infer from this analysis, from this prediction? Basically, we can say that both rich states and poor states or lagging states will have high debt, but there's going to be a very huge difference between how the debt is going to be utilized. Rich states are going to use the debt for paying the service cost, as well as utilizing the debt for planned expenditure. Okay, putting the money towards bridges and roads and schools and hospitals, broadband, taking the internet to the rural areas, so on and so forth. But the less developed states is going to be using that debt to pay the service costs and perhaps unplanned or non-planned expenditure. And so that is what I infer from what is going to happen in the near future. And so with that, I sort of conclude my discussion by saying that there are certain lessons and implications that one can argue for. And so the lessons from the analysis is that increase in lending rates decreases the incentives for increasing debt at the center or the state government level. Positive trade balance is growth inducing, which aids in decreasing the total liability. A positive increase in GDP, as I showed in a previous slide, raises the capacity of the government to increase total liability for enhancing productive expenditure. External resources such as the FDI flows, that promotes an increase in total liability because state governments at both the center and the state level has the enhanced capacity to utilize that resource for investing in assets or resources or areas with the highest rate of return, and utilize that financial resource to reduce the interest cost burden as well. And so with that, I kind of end my discussion. I hope I've not taken all the time or more than the allocated time. And so I thank you very much for your kind attention, and wish you all a happy holiday. There's a large group of people listening to my talk. Be safe as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the insights you have given to us. Before I propose a vote of thanks and I can give the concluding remarks over here for the talk, I would open up the session for the participants to have any Q&A round. If you would love to have, I can allow you to go with it. Whosoever wants to ask, please raise your hand so that I can unmute, I can allow your mic. Yes, students or the faculty member or the research scholars. Do we have anyone who would like to ask any question?
I think either I did a very good job or I did a very poor job.
No, sir, you did a very good job actually. Your presentation was well explanatory, and moreover, if we talk about the graphical representations has made it very clear to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, students.
I think the director wants to ask a question.
Ma'am, you may ask.
Yes, thank
Or
you, Ashuna. Thank you, Professor Sudhir Thakur, for
Good
giving
to see
such
you.
a
Good to see you,
valuable
Dr.
insights.
Agarwal.
Pleasure meeting you.
Likewise.
It has been an extremely a pleasure for us to hear you on public debt and regional inequalities. I think your presentation was very analytical, deep in thought, and gave us very good foresight into what would be the situation of the public debt that is there. I think I have not seen a work which has taken right from 1950s till 2019 a data study on public debt so far and has assessed each and every state so beautifully, taking into consideration the overall situation of India. Well, public debt has always been a matter of concern for India, especially after 1990s crisis, and as well as has been a prime concern because it does affect the ability for any country to grow for itself. We do understand that we have the FRBM Act, which does restrict the
Yes.
fiscal deficit positions and restricts the government to bring about internal and external borrowings. But things have changed because of COVID, and as we see that the fiscal deficit has ranged about 12.5% in the last year, and it's likely to be about 6.8% and above, probably even go up to 9% somewhere. The situation for the government to fund its expenditures both at the state and the center level becomes very serious. Uh, Also, we do understand that the government has been lately focusing a lot on the infrastructure development, whether it's development of ports, airports, roads, railways, providing for other facilities. But at the same time, given its commitments for reforms, it has also been pushing strongly reforms of privatization. Like you must have heard about the Air India getting disinvested and the PSU banks are
Mhm.
lined for disinvestment.
Mhm.
There does, with your research study, we do understand that public debt would be a serious problem in 2021, 2022, but is likely to come down by 2024. I fully appreciate what you've said and understand this. I would like you to let us know as to how do you feel that the situation of public debt vis-a-vis, because you also had evaluated it with GDP. How do you feel that the GDP and the public debt would play a complementary or a role, affecting it with respect to inflation or any other, or not working in favor of the GDP growth rates that are there. Also, as an emerging nation, which India stands, and given the parameters of the changes that have been taking place in the macroeconomic environment, how do you feel with your study that where does India stand in repositioning itself as a strong economy, which it was prior to the COVID levels?
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments, Director Agarwal. Um, yes, you're very true in your remarks, and some of the points that you've made is in my paper regarding the act that you talked about. Um, Predicting the future is a big challenge. It's very difficult because a lot of things can happen going forward. So so the argument and basically towards the end, the prediction that I've made is obviously based on past data. It is not taking into consideration the uncertainty that India and the world faces. Let's begin to think about the global health crisis, because that is in charge today. That is driving the world economy. And so where we are going to be in the next few years depends quite a lot on how we handle or get a handle on the health crisis and with respect to employment. And so so I understand that in India, because of the COVID situation, a lot of people have migrated back to their homes, and so employment levels in the informal sector are very low, and that is going to impact the rate of growth of the GDP. But again, given the fact that India has been very resilient in its ability to come back even after shock. I mean, time has shown us that the 1990-91 BOP crisis, the 1980s debt crisis, we were able to come back, and the data is there. It shows that we have been able to come back, and so there's a strong sense that moving forward, I think we are getting into a more technologically dominant world. And when we say technologically dominant world, where technology dominates, I mean, you have to accept the fact that India is going to play a leading role in the area of information and communication technology. I mean, just look at what's happening today. Because of the health crisis, although all countries are suffering and facing difficulty, a lot of deaths, a lot of people are getting sick. But on the other side, things that we could not imagine in the past, communicating across the globe. I mean, I'm here on the other side of the world, and you're on the other side of the world, and we are able to discuss and debate and think about problems. And so, going into the future, as technology dominates the evolution and shapes the world economy, India is going to be there on the forefront. And the digital ecosystem that we have there, I mean, it's not gone, it's there, and it's going to pick up. And that same role that it played in the mid to late 80s and the 90s, globalization of services, and India was at the forefront, it's going to come back. And so my strong faith in the Indian economy is because of the role that it has played in the past and that it will play in the future, that is going to get India back on where it was before, and that would impact the rate of growth, the GDP rate of growth, and bring the overall growth of Indian economy to the forefront.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I have a question too. Like
Yes.
when we talk about there is a regional imbalances or regional inequality, when we talk about the places like northern, eastern, or Kashmir, how can we focus on these states to reduce down the burden of the public debt?
Okay.
Since the government have been trying their best to make the infrastructure more strong, but due to you can say that the political imbalances, or if you talk about the disturbances from the neighboring nations,
Yes.
actually creating the problem. But how can we focus on these two places?
You have raised a very important point, and thank you for making that. In my paper, I talk about the fact that the northeastern states, in Jammu and Kashmir, they are in a different political situation. These have been protected states. These have been under different treaties from the government of India, and these are lagging states, and so it's a big question that you have asked on how do we go about addressing the problem of regional inequality. Of course, there is it's a very politicized question on how to bring down the level of the average debt ratios in these states so that they participate in the overall fruits of development. I don't think I can come across, I can make an argument or make a strong case on how to do that. But I think a totally different approach besides economic analysis or regional analysis would be needed to address these issues. I mean, you need a political situation, a political solution, a social solution to address the problem of regional inequality. Regional inequality to me is a very multidisciplinary problem. It is social, it is political, it is economical, it is geographical, and I'm not taking into consideration all of the various dimensions to address the very complicated situation of regional imbalance in India with respect to debt. And so I don't have a ready solution, but I am aware of the fact that these northeastern states and these northern states that you saw on the map, on each of the map, are the problem areas. And the problem is exacerbated more because of the fact that these regions are also protected by special treaties. And one needs a different solution. One needs a different way to examine the problems in these states because of the special nature of these states. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much, sir. Do we have anyone who would like to ask question? You may please raise your hand. Okay, let's conclude the session now.
Sure.
I think there is someone who wants to ask a question. There is
Um,
somebody's hand is raised.
let me just check, ma'am. Because some people are not visible on my screen. Let me check.
I think it's Bhavya Basil. Bhavya Basil, can you please ask? No. Yes. Can you please ask your question, Bhavya? Bhavya, can you please ask your question? Can you unmute Bhavya Basin, Dr. Ashima?
I'm trying to unmute, allowing his mic.
Mic is disabled for him.
Yeah, I'm just doing that.
Very
Bhavya, you
informative
can ask. Yes.
presentation.
Please go ahead, Mr. Bhavya.
Yes, sir. Sir, I would like to seek your insights on the impact the Government of India schemes, namely the National Monetization Pipeline and National Infrastructure Pipeline, would have on reducing the public debt of the Government of India.
Could you repeat the first part of your question? It was not very clear at my end.
Sir, like I would like to seek your insights or your views on the Government of India schemes like the National Monetization Pipeline and the National Infrastructure Pipeline would have on reducing the public debt of the government.
Okay, Professor Sudhir, I'll give you the background for that because I don't know if you know that the government announced a national monetization scheme primarily to support the infrastructure built up that we have. And again, they have been concentrating on the PPP models and the other models primarily to seek capital into the infrastructure funding.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd give you the background.
Yeah, I've not heard of this news. Is this something that came out lately?
Yes, it has been recently announced by Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, primarily to support the government in terms of its infrastructure requirement, where they are likely to monetize the infrastructure projects that are there. Again, to reduce the fiscal deficits of the government. So the aim is that.
Yes.
So he's asking you how this particular scheme is likely to influence the public debt in India.
Okay. I will not make my comments about the particular act or the particular proposition that is made, but I will use an example. In the US, President Biden has passed a bill. It's a multi-trillion-dollar bill that is going to utilize funds for financing infrastructure projects that are that will help recover the dilapidated bridges and airports and things like that. Research in economics or economic theory makes the argument, makes the case that investing in infrastructure projects, first of all, it brings employment, it increases employment to a lot of people who are unemployed, especially in the working class categories, in the working class states. And so it has a job creation, employment generation that can have a lot of multiplier type effects in addressing the growth of the economy. And so once it helps in enhancing growth, then it can help in perhaps raising more income as well. That will have an impact on income generation business prosperity that I'm sure again will have more multiplier effects in terms of the input-output sense, in the linkage sense, in the input-output connection, in the through backward-forward linkages that would help the economy grow at a faster rate and address the debt situation, the debt problem in the country. So I'm not exactly answering his question, but it's a similar problem that we have in the U.S. as well. That the U.S. also has a very high debt, and so there's a lot of discussion on how these infrastructure projects can help in creating a dent in addressing and getting a hold on the debt climate and the debt situation in the U.S. I'm using this analogy perhaps to infer what might happen on those projects, using those projects in India as well.
Oh, thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ashima, you're on mute. If you can please unmute yourself. Dr. Ashima, yes.
Do we have anyone?
I don't think we have anybody else. Can Dr. Ashima, can you propose the vote of thanks, please? You're on mute, Dr. Ashima. Dr. Ashima, you're on mute. No, you're not audible. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable time. I considered it is a great pleasure to propose a vote of thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. Sudhir Thakur, for his valuable insights into public debt and regional inequality in India. I would like to mention the points which he has covered in this particular talk. The most important point I would like to highlight over here that he discussed the Blancard model in a very extensive way, which made us understood like how the public debt is actually affecting the nation. Secondly, he also emphasized on he made some predictions in his research paper which is under review, and he has also made us very clear on that what sort of criteria and what sort of positions we could have from 2020 till 2025 when we break down this into 2021, 2020 to 23 and 2024-25. So in that case, in 2021, we are already facing this major debt, and 2021, 2022-23, we could able to reduce down marginally, but we are not very sure that to what extent we are going to work on that. 2024-25, there will be a major shift in this public debt because of the development in the nation and the advancement and the infrastructural improvements. And he also put focus on one thing which talks about there's a positive if there's a positive trade which will definitely increase in GDP, and that could be possible with the help of external resources if you introduce more FDIs, or if we go ahead with the privatization as it is already taking place in India. It has put up for the bills for the approval from the parliament now. And then the last point which he has focused on, wherein he said that there is a regional inequality in places like when we talk about, we have the states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, which has the lowest, these states have the lowest debt positions. as compared to the, if you talk about Kashmir and UP, wherein we have to work and we have to identify that what sort of reasons can be overcome in days to come, so that we can reduce down their burden of that, those particular states' debt. I take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks to Director Ma'am, Dr. Yamini Agarwal, for such initiative she took in convening this program, and also extending us the opportunity to organize such an insightful session. I must express my deep gratitude to BVIMR, all the faculty members from our institute and various other universities, and all our dear students for joining us and making this program a success. I'm sure such programs will definitely pave the way for budding managers, scholars, academicians to become leaders in their own communities. We again thank you, sir, for your valuable inputs and especially the insights which you have given. And I would again say this thing and wouldn't mind in saying this thing, that your presentation was extremely good because it has all the descriptions over there along with all the pictures and the graphs. Thank you so much, sir, once again. Have a good day to you. Thank you, Yamini.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, Director Agarwal. Thank you very much
Thank you so
for
much.
this opportunity. I hope someday I would be able to visit your institute in person to perhaps interact with faculty and students.
Yes, it would be our pleasure. We hope to welcome
I
you
usually
soon.
visit Delhi every 1 or 2 years, and so because of the pandemic, I'm not. But my parents stay in Delhi, so I would definitely be visiting sometime in the near future. So hopefully, looking forward to seeing you all.
Looking forward to see you and meet you.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much. Namaste.
Bye-bye.
Allow me to stop the recording now.